I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This show is not about lumberjacks. For over 7 years, that's how I've started every episode of my fiction podcast of the same name. This video is about how I narrate an episode, but before we get to that, a little bit of history. I am the last person I ever thought would end up narrating stories. I'm not only dyslexic, but I have speech issues. As a kid, even my orthodontist was surprised by how deformed the roof of my mouth was. He was fortunately able to reshape it a little bit. Because of this, I spent most of my youth trying to remain invisible, which wasn't easy as one of the bigger kids in school. In 2010, following a layoff, I decided to narrate and release my first novel as a podcast. I had no idea what I was doing, but I bought a mic, plugged it into a laptop, and recorded on free software. Then, in 2015, I started a regular fiction podcast called Not About Lumberjacks. While I typically hate the phrase, if I can do it, anyone can, this is the closest I've ever come to that in my life. All right, enough of that. We last left off with this. The intros, outros, and story are written. I know what music and effects are needed. Character voices are ready to go. Now it's time to narrate. But it's not as simple as turning on a microphone and reading. There's a little bit of setup involved, and then the actual recording. A quick aside, sometimes I know I'm not the right person to narrate a story. My wife narrates most Not About Lumberjack stories from a woman's point of view. And if the story requires accents or I just want to work with a friend, I find narrators who can pull that off. Mostly, though, my wife and I narrate most of the stories just because it's easier to do in-house. On recording days, I hydrate. It's a fine line between hydration and not needing to pee in the middle of recording, but I find if I hydrate early, all that's needed in the booth are tiny sips of water to get through the recording. Because I don't have room for a dedicated recording space, recording is either done in a closet or makeshift booth constructed out of acoustic blankets. Currently, I record using a Shure SM7B dynamic microphone running through a solid-state Logic SSL2 audio interface. And the interface runs into a MacBook running Adobe Audition. Once I make sure that all my settings are correct and the file's ready for recording, I turn off the air conditioner or heater, grab my trusty water bottle, and press record. I mentioned before that I'm dyslexic. I have a tough time getting through sentences, so I pause in the middle of most of them, take a deep breath, and continue with the same cadence so I can shore things up while editing. When I mess up a line, I press M on my laptop's keyboard to insert a marker. More on why in the next video, but markers let me know where I messed up during the recording. And I do all this for as long as it takes to record a story. A 30-minute story means that I'm going to be in the closet or recording booth for an hour to an hour and a half, but it's not uncommon that it might even take 2 hours. The handful of Not About Lumberjack stories crossing the 1 hour mark were hell to record, but they're among my favorite stories to date. There's really not much more to it than just putting in the effort. When I'm done recording, I break everything down and I relax. The most tedious part of the whole process is still to come, but the hardest part, for me at least, is over. It's only then that I have a celebratory drink and think about what's still to come. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, or go to nolumberjacks.com and listen to a story. And if you missed the first or last video in this series, they should be somewhere right here.